All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of 2023's Solving the People Puzzle, where I, your host, Francois de Wet, have wonderful and beautiful conversations, everything HR. The podcast is called Solving the People Puzzle because the aim of the podcast is to give back to the HR community. HR managers, HR execs, HR business partners, anybody in human capital or in a business owner capacity, or just anybody who's following the journey. So thank you so much for doing that. Thank you for tuning back in 2023. And we are kicking off season 2 with a bang. I am so excited to welcome Ronen to the podcast. Ronen, how are you doing?
Thanks for having me, Fran.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for agreeing to do this with me. I would like to start off by asking you to introduce yourself. High level, student village. We'll get into the book that you wrote, Breach. But just for the audience, just introduce yourself, please.
Yes, I've been an entrepreneur for over 20 years. I have a BCom from Wits, and this is where I often usually start. Not about the Wits, but I studied accounts and psychology. And I was always fascinated about business and people. But what I realized when I was studying, I was actually studying psychology to understand why I was actually studying accounts. And so I started a career in banking, and then I've spent the last 22 years in youth. And so Student Village really is a company that helps large brands understand and engage with the youth market. So the 18 to 25-year-old student predominantly, and we go earlier into scholars and later into young professionals. And I think I've just been privileged to have seen over 20 years of youth and what's kind of stayed the same and what's changed over the years. And so what we do is specifically for HR leaders, what we help them with creating campaigns to attract the right talent, entry-level talent to their business, as well as young professionals. And then we also manage bursary schemes,
Sure.
etc.
I love that. I have a question. So where in your studies did you actually then figure out the psychological reason for you studying accounting?
It was very early on. I would say probably in Psych 1, and I kind of went through it. I was brought up in the family business. I grew up in a small town in the East Rand, and we had a family business, and I was the third generation, and I was actually avoiding the business. I had a lifelong internship. I was groomed to be the next successor, and I just knew it wasn't my gig.
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted to make some kind of difference in the world, and I was always fascinated about the human condition and often the human catastrophe. And when the idea of Student Village came up, if you think of the world, what did the world look like in 2001? Well, the internet had just arrived. Not everyone had mobile phones.
Yeah.
Google wasn't around. There wasn't Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. Any of those things didn't exist. So we started off as a website and actually as a laughing joke. And really what we wanted to do is create a student community because companies weren't taking the youth seriously. So we thought that power in numbers, that if you could create a big community, that as a collective, they'd be super powerful.
Yes.
And maybe that's a great segue to where we are today, is the youth now are 30% of the population. So you cannot afford not to take them seriously.
Yes.
And so companies are waking up to the potential, and those that haven't woken up yet are about to get a big surprise in the next few years.
100%. I think so many touch points there around the employee life cycle and the fact that it is impossible to ignore that there are these generations in the workforce and that the millennials and the Gen Zs, which your book is about, called Breach, we'll get to that in a second, are in the workforce. And we have to pay attention around how do we attract them? How do we recruit them? How do we retain them? How do we manage their performance? And it's not, in my opinion, and I would love to hear yours about this whole narrative around it's us and them. I think like maybe that's the first point to have a conversation around. It's not us versus you, it's right versus wrong. But there is this kind of subconscious, at least from my perspective, dealing with some large corporates, there is a subconscious idea around they are coming, almost like the AI or the machines.
It's almost like aliens. And so let me tell you a story, and I think it would tie into my book Breach, because that's where the idea actually came from. So having had over 20 years experience in in the youth market, I got the. Do you remember the first few weeks of lockdown?
Yes. Where we thought it would only be 3 weeks.
We only thought it was 3 weeks, and now we're in week 4 and 5. We got used to this new way of living. And I remember lying on the couch. I remember having my laptop on me. Netflix was on in the background. I remember my phone was on the couch. So I'm lying flat on the couch. I'm about to hop onto my fifth call for the day. And it almost struck me like lightning. And it struck me that they were right. And who am I talking about? I'm talking about the younger generations. So for many, many years, I've been brought into the boardroom to help leaders and execs understand the aliens that they were so excited to hire have now arrived in the workplace, and they're being disruptive. They're, they're, they, they can't understand them. And what I realized is I was brought in under the guise of help us understand young people and younger generations. But actually, the subtext was help them become more like us, the older generation.
Sure.
So in that moment, I realized that what a pandemic forced us to do, to work remotely, to be flexible, to use technology, to relook at our working practices, generations before. So for over 10 years, I've been hearing around flexibility. Why should I be tied to my desk from 8 to 5 in the morning? So that's where the lightning bolt happened.
Okay. Well, I think let's then jump straight into that, because ultimately the podcast, as I said, is around giving back value, but also allowing the audience with the opportunity to, from tomorrow, to start implementing some tools, techniques, tricks, tips, gain insight into how do I make this practical. So perhaps as a foundation, let's then start with if I read and I do some research and I speak to people, the young generations or the newer generations, one, they are tied to technology, right? So technology is integrated into their world. They're connected, but the question then becomes like, are they really connected? They're expecting this from organizations' perspectives. Is it just technology that's this big difference between the generations, where I'm not going to become like you need to become like me? Or what else is there that is creating this distance that we first need to be aware of before we go into, okay, how do we deal with it?
Yeah, I think the way I like to understand the differences and the nuances between the generations without getting too technical is think of it like when you buy a new device or when you upgrade your software. So what happens when you upgrade your software is usually there are new features and some bugs are fixed, and usually new bugs are created.
Yes.
And so kind of how I look at this generation is they're the Gen Zs, and sometimes I call them Gen Re or Gen We, because they've really been born into a world of chaos. They've been born into a world that's really stuffed up. It's not their fault. But they've almost been sent in with a higher purpose mission as a fixer. So they're great with technology. They don't know the world without technology. So they're true digital natives. They don't know analog.
Yes.
They've been taught at school how to collaborate. They've been taught how to use technology to solve problems. They've been taught how to think critically and creatively problem solve. So what you've got is an incubation of extraordinary talent that is going to come into the workplace, into the economy, and into the world, even politics, to really disrupt and help us to recalibrate and to solve problems that were created before them. So look at them as kind of fixers that are, it is about me, but it's also about we, and I'm here to really help and roll up my sleeves and get to work, as opposed to just be watching and observing the things that I want to change. So they have this true need for authenticity. That's another big thing. Like they're much kinder, they're much more authentic, and they're very values driven. And I think that's what we're talking about in the context of both recruiting and retention.
Yes, I love that. And we have had many episodes in the past around AI and technology and the disruption of that. And even ChatGPT, the last couple of weeks, hitting the world with a massive bang and going viral. There is this decision that one needs to make around, is this now a threat? Is it going to replace me? Or is it just part of the world of work's evolution to free up some tasks that we've been forced to do because we didn't have the technology, so that we can become more curious, more emotionally connected with each other, more focused on. I mean, the title of your book, or the subtitle of the book, is that it's be more conscious. And I feel like the Gen Zs are very conscious. I mean, you mentioned, and I loved reading your book, by the way, Fighting for Change, focusing on hope and keeping hope alive. So there is a deep emotional element to this, even though the perception is, they might not be connected because they're on their phone the whole time, which I think is valuable for the audience. And if you're in HR or at any, generation listening to this, because the perception might be that it's not about values, it's all about instant gratification. It's around, I need to have a purpose, but it also has to be right now. And if it's not, I'm just going to leave. Because retention, back to HR, is a big problem, especially amongst young professionals who are in high demand jobs like developers and BAs. So I think that's an important, differentiating idea around my perception versus what really drives and they value, which I'm sure in 20 years and building Student Village, you've researched and you have the data around that, right?
Yeah. So let me tell you a few things, and I want to go back to ChatGPT because I've got a great example. Just yesterday in Student Village, so for 30 of us, we wanted to learn about ChatGPT. So this is now like the young elders and young people. And what we've got a young engineering student who must have been 20 to come and teach us not only about the platform, but how to use it in our business. And
Yes.
so what we did, it was almost reciprocal learning. So it was embracing the technology, and it was getting a young person to teach the elders. And the elder could be 25, could be 35 or 45, but it's really listening to young people and letting them show the way. It comes so naturally to them. And what we did is we took a few things that are on our to-do list, from ordinary things like coming up with a campaign idea to writing a legal contract to a social media post, and we actually did it live as a group.
Yes.
And so it just became this extraordinary experiential learning experience driven by a 20-year-old. I think this is the example of how to embrace young people and let them show you, and you kind of co-create and collaborate to create a future that you both want to live in. And
Yes.
so when we talk about values, I think it's really important. This is the one thing, if I was a recruiter and wanting to know one thing, if you wanted to get into the head of a young person, it's you need to know that when you're casting your net out to recruit young people, you think that you hold the power, but it's actually the opposite way around. You know, they it's asymmetrical. They want you to treat them like you want to get married, and they're
Sure.
treating you like you're on Tinder. And
Sure.
so it's very transactional. It's very much values driven. So I want to see if the company can guide me to my greatness. I want to see if there's a values alignment. I want to see, will they help me to learn and grow? Do they take a stand for the social causes that are important to me? You know, are they inclusive? Do they have gender neutral bathrooms on a practical level? You know, there's so many things that are um, are important to young people. The newest thing, and it's definitely a post-pandemic thing in every interview is coming up, is what is the policy around flexibility, and what they're not saying is what is your policy around side hustles. You know, 34% of the people we've surveyed between 15 and 35 have side hustles.
Yeah.
So it's a go for it.
No. So it just reminded me, the other day I was speaking to Marco. He's called the Gen Z guy, and he was telling me
Yeah.
that some of the organizations that he worked with, they've got Side Hustle Fridays, where they're encouraging the side hustle, and they're also giving some support because there's a values alignment around, I'm here, I'm deciding to stay. We have this massive unemployment problem. We need to create jobs. Government's not doing that for us, so we might as well just take control and try and do that. And can the corporate support me in potentially still getting the value that they are paying me for, but also supporting me in a side hustle because I'm chasing meaning and purpose?
Yeah, I think that's very progressive thinking. So if you think about this generation, what's different is that they have this thing of self-reliance.
Mm.
So they know the government's not going to provide their needs for them. They know that there's a global world of opportunities, so they're not really restricted to this country, and technology enables them to do that.
Yeah.
The truth behind the flexibility, most old-fashioned or traditional employers are thinking flexibility means they're at home watching Netflix, that their productivity is going to take a dive. And young people are thinking they want to lead a more meaningful kind of integrated life that is on their own terms. They have their own agency, and it doesn't come at the expense of their mental health. And so the big question is, are we recalibrating the workplace from I own you and you'll work around the clock until things are done? Or are we kind of finding a new normal where I can work for you, create all the outcomes. I can also follow my passion and make money from that. And I can look after my physical and mental health too.
Yes. So much to double click here. So I'm going to go straight into three things. The first is, okay, so we spoke about attraction, and I think there were some beautiful golden nuggets that the audience can take away. And I think just from my side and our experience around this is a lot of the documents in organizations have always had the same purpose. So a job profile, a personal development plan, performance management methodology, like the purpose has always been clear. But I feel like this generation now, which 30% of the workforce, is like really forcing us to actually think about, is it adding value? Is it in line with the strategy? So if my job ad is X and I'm not attracting talent, let me really go and focus on my attraction strategy and the information I'm putting out there and think about how to resonate with the audience. I had a conversation earlier with a lovely colleague who was speaking about the energy in a document. Now, I don't want to sound weird, but the word choice in terms of attracting the person that you feel will fit the requirements of the role in the business is it like starts there. Okay, so let's not rant on around attraction. It is important. Let's think about how do you attract. Then you mentioned, now I'm in the organization. I want to chase meaning. I want to chase being fluid. And then you mentioned something extremely important, mental health, because I believe there's a direct correlation between retention and mental health. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. So what this generation has done is really outed the things that previous generations have been thinking and either lobbying against silently or just keeping it as an internal frustration. So
Yes.
the things that we were kind of taught to grin and bear, this generation are just not prepared to. So
Yes.
we're seeing so many examples of people just almost like canceling the company they work at. So literally upping and leaving because if they feel that their mental health is at risk, they'd rather be at home than be in a toxic environment. And so a number of things that a company needs to know is just when it comes to values, you've got to walk and talk your values. And what we're seeing a lot overseas, and it will come locally, is you can either have a brand loyalist or enthusiast internally, and they will absolutely amplify your brand, and it will be amazing. But you can also face the opposite.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing is young people around the world are actually almost forming unions or joining unions at big companies like Amazon and Starbucks and all these kind of companies where they're looking for fairness in the workplace.
Yeah.
And it could be how you treat your employees. It could be about sustainable practices, et cetera, et cetera. Young people can either be your enthusiast or the seeds of your rebellion. And so
Yes.
it's almost that's the warning of the breach.
Yes. Yes. You know, I expect that some of the audience members are going, but what about the the fact that we need to make money, the fact that we have to be productive, the fact that this is the world of work, the fact that we can't meet every single individual's specific individual needs, that this is not an NGO. Like as a business owner for both yourself and myself, you know, ultimately we understand that the organization needs to move forward, right? There needs to be productivity. We need to make money. So is there something that we can leave them with that addresses that? Because it's a concern. And the concern might be completely valid. It might be a mindset. It might be a specific lens that they decide to look at the conversation with. But I do believe it would be valuable for us to deep dive into just the opposite of where are they coming from because of the expectation of the business needs to grow and go forward. So let's just get on with it.
Yeah, so I think we're going into territory where, if you think about the status quo has really been about masculine leadership, both in its physical form, men, as well as the masculinity of fire, vision, fire, drive, growth. Where,
Yes.
where the world is changing, and what they're ushering in is more of the feminine energy, either through females or the feminine approach of nurturing. So it's a lot more gentler, but it is by no means communism.
Yes.
And so they have no issue with making profits. They just don't want to be the catastrophe or the collateral damage in the pursuit of profits. So they're looking for to make profits, but not at the expense of themselves or the environment, etc., etc. And in my opinion, what I've seen in my own business and in clients' businesses, when you bring youth in early, when you value their opinion, when you help empower them to find their voice and to be part of the solution, and for them to be part of earning too.
Yeah.
So bring them in. The more you include, the more you harness the beauty of the gifts that they bring in. So it's our role to guide from the side and not to lead as the commander in chief. And so it's a more coaching style of leadership, but it certainly is. They certainly do want to make money and they want to do well.
Yeah, and I think the fact that they are driving side hustles, proves that point. It's not that they're not a profit conscious generation. The world is getting more expensive. Yeah, in some areas, some elements like communication, messaging, access to knowledge, that's becoming cheaper. But I mean, the basics will always be there. I I'm always aware of the fact that whether you fight this or not, it's happening. It's very similar to technology, disruptive technology. There were people who to this day are ignoring the fact that blockchain is around, that crypto is around, like just kind of blissfully or ignorantly going along, running, your pattern without really acknowledging that. And the point is, it's happening. And so the same is with this generation entering the workforce. It's not going to stop. Like in a couple of years' time, they will be exco, they will be decision makers. And I think the opportunity for organizations and for individuals who is in this situation is to embrace this. And this is now maybe back to your book is to say, well, how can we learn? How can, like your chat GPT example is, how can we bring them in and learn from them? And I guess the leadership part ultimately, I think, forms a big foundation of this conversation. And I'd love to hear your take on that. There's obviously this video went viral, the Simon Sinek video on millennials, where in 15 minutes he's like unpacking the whole why around, and it is a great video where they speak about low self-esteem, the lack of parenthood, the fact that there's this dopamine hit that is associated with technology, etc., etc. And we'll have that in the show notes as well, audience. So if you're interested and you haven't seen that, go and check it out. But he ends off, and you touched on this as well, he ends off with, there's a responsibility for us to nurture, foster, coach, empower, and grow this generation because they might not have had that. Do you agree?
Yeah, and if you look at the South African example of, by and large, a single parent household, so the absent father syndrome,
Yes.
and what we're seeing coming into the workplace, specifically with young people, is those that have been fortunate to have private schooling are coming in with the most amazing skills. Those that haven't been as fortunate to have it are lacking in many ways. And really, they come into the workplace mimicking or almost expecting an idealistic parental relationship.
Yes.
So what I speak of in the book is actually the role of the future is not manager, but momager. And it's almost like a nurturing parent with a stick.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's what they're looking for. They're looking for the combination of mommy and daddy in one, but more mommy than daddy. They want more nurturing, but they really need the guidance. They need the support, and their resilience muscle isn't as strong as potentially we have, because we've had exposure to the workplace for all these years.
Yes.
So really, they need support to stay in the game. We need to be able to listen to them and understand them. Just because they're different, it doesn't mean they're wrong. And the same holds for us. And we've got to look at it as almost like an evolutionary driver. How do we let go of some of our own sacred beliefs and let new beliefs come in?
Yes.
And that's part of the role of changing the world, is letting go of what we thought was sacred and ushering new ideas so that we can both co-create a future in a world that we both want to live in.
That's beautiful. I think, ultimately, any job, any employee in an organization is ultimately a transaction. It's a transaction of effort and value. And the opportunity here is I can bring innovation, technology, disruption, speed and efficiency, and you can bring skills that I don't have yet because of the age and the time I'm living in and the context of specifically South Africa, which is, many other countries out there share similar contexts and challenges. And then there's this opportunity for that transaction to happen where I can learn and grow from you, you can learn and grow from me. It's not I'm right, you're wrong. It's not top down, bottom up. It's a collaboration. There's that synergy and that dance. Because ultimately we are there for the same reason, right? We want ourselves and the organization to go forward.
Yeah. And also I think for leaders, and if we go back to the ChatGPT example, was really I spoke to the team and said, well, this is an opportunity for us to learn and grow quickly as a business, because if we don't, we're literally dinosaurs with our heads in the sand. And so there's a stage where you can remain ignorant, and then there's a stage where it will take you out.
Yes.
That's the breach.
Yes.
And so it's about embracing, but it's also about, the older generations need to iterate and they need to transform themselves, because we're living in a time where our life expectancy is much, much longer than it ever was.
Yeah.
We're retiring. Most people aren't making enough to retire early. So you have to work longer and you have to reinvent yourself. And so this is the process of reinventing yourself.
Yes.
If you want to know the future, you've got to look youngwards. And so kind of if you move with them, you naturally evolve. And so you use your wisdom, you drop some of your beliefs, and you move forward with them, and you'll just see the natural evolution and magic unfold.
What a phenomenal way to end. I want to thank you. There's so much to still speak about. Ronen, where can the audience find you if they are interested in hearing more about you?
So you can find me at my website, ronenaires.com, or you can find me through Student Village or on LinkedIn. Just look up my name.
Fantastic. We will have that in the show notes. I want to thank you so much for joining. It's been an absolute blast. I am really excited in pushing this episode and getting some feedback from the audience. And audience, we would love to give away 3 of Ronen's books. So look at the Whamley marketing and social media content going out. We'll run a small competition, and we would love to give away 3 of your books, signed books, Ronen, if that's right with you.
Of course.
Fantastic.
And just to let everyone know, if you are looking for the book, it's actually one of the recommended reads on at Exclusive Books for the month of February. And it's available online through Exclusive, Amazon, and Take-A-Lot.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining. It was lovely seeing you again and speaking with you, and I'm excited with you for 2023.
Likewise, friend. Thanks, man.